There's so many reasons why a company fails early. The single biggest reason is they build the wrong product solving the wrong problem. They don't really spend enough time up front doing the customer discovery.
Right.
They build the technology first, and then they try and figure out who they can sell it to.
Tell me about this area.
So we're in Culver City, which since I moved to LA 18 years ago has always been considered up and coming. And I still feel like every month, every year, there's more exciting and interesting things in Culver City. I don't actually live in Culver City, so I don't get paid to say that. But my office is in Culver City. The history of LA tech, I felt like it started in the west side, Santa Monica, and then started migrating south and then has expanded east. But
Right.
I think the center of LA tech feels like Culver. I'll be walking down the street and I'll run into entrepreneurs I know, mentors I know, investors who have offices in Culver. I think it's for a couple of reasons. One, like the 10 and the 405 intersect here.
Right.
And so you can get here from almost anywhere in LA in a half hour or less.
I would agree with you just for the fact that I spend a lot of time here. And
There you go.
Here, investors, CEO founders, I find myself in this area.
Culver City also has great school district. It's not technically part of LAUSD.
Okay.
I won't ding on LAUSD, but Culver City schools are
Right.
very good. There's Apple here. Scopely is here. There's some really cool warehouses that have been converted into schools that are here. Salvador Dali's butler, or maybe it was Picasso's butler, I'm not sure, eventually became an architect and bought up all of this land and started this architecture company. And he has this weird type of style. You'll see it here. Like nothing is normal. They look like alien spaceships
Right,
from a
right.
Ridley Scott movie
do.
or some kind of apocalyptic. It's called Scimitar. You can see it there. But this whole district, I think it's called Helms. No, this isn't Helms. This is the Arts District. Just weird. Like, what is this building here? It's just a stairway to nowhere. So it's kind of abstract, kind of neat to walk around.
Yeah, super
We
cool.
like it. Look at that building. They call it the Bandage Building.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
And interestingly, our partners at the Space Force took offices there for a year.
Let's talk about space, aerospace. You've been doing the cohorts for Techstars for how many years now it's been?
I joined Techstars just over 8 years ago to build out our healthcare program, which you were a mentor for.
Yep.
I think you may have been a mentor in the second year, though.
I believe it was the second year. Over at Cedars, right?
Yeah. And in 2018, there were three converging forces that I thought had a lot of potential for us to invest in here in LA. One was that the cost per kilogram of getting anything into space was coming down by orders of magnitude, thanks to SpaceX, to be honest, and to a lesser extent, Blue Origin Rocket Lab. So all of a sudden, just as cloud computing became an enabler of all sorts of technology companies, Rackspace and AWS later, platforms to build businesses from that couldn't have existed 10 years ago economically.
Right.
So that's one. The second is that the DoD, particularly the Air Force, was becoming far more commercially engaged and was opening up their grant application process to be far more compelling for early stage founders. And then NASA started to take similar approaches. Venture capital has also woken up to the opportunities. And in Southern California, we have, I think, more aerospace engineering talent than anywhere else in the country.
Right.
There's some really great clusters in Colorado and DC as well, but there's been so much history and legacy here in SoCal between Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, SpaceX, Howard Hughes, NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab, Rocket Labs, Relativity. I mean, there's an enormous amount of talent here. And whenever you have that much talent, and opportunity, people starting companies. I felt like Techstars has an opportunity to build a resource for those founders at those earliest stages to help them get to their first $1 million of revenue, get them their first couple million in grants, get them their first couple million in venture capital, and help them build really great companies. I started working on it in 2018, and then we ran it in 2019. In that first cohort, we had 10 companies. I think 7 of them have raised 10 million or more, which is a pretty good hit rate for Techstars.
Absolutely. What would you say Techstars from a whole, like, what are the top 3 things that these founders get?
The first is a wildly supportive network of experienced founders, senior executives, and investors who are gunning for them and helping them, not expecting anything in return. Our whole philosophy at Techstars is give first. So they get these like wildly accomplished, super helpful, well-connected people who are basically working for them for free. The second is customers. I think, I run our program as a BD on steroids machine. Like, I want companies to 3 to 10x their revenue. So it's, traction with really, really strong support coming from the mentors from my team. We have like 80 corporate partnerships. On the healthcare side, we have Cedars-Sinai, UCIrvine, UnitedHealthcare, Point 32. On the aerospace side, we have Space Force and JPL. And then the third is funding. We're going to work our asses off to make sure that our companies coming out of the program have a compelling story, have a good strategy for what they're going to raise, on what terms, have the connections to the VCs. We're that warm intro, opening doors into organizations that are not necessarily easy to get those introductory meetings.
Right. The network is so incredible. Like you said, from knowledge to capital to meaty, it is just absolutely incredible.
And if you look at like what we've done just locally in LA, we are running the LA program, which has about 300 to 400 mentors. We have our healthcare program, which has about 300 to 400 mentors. And we have our space program, which has about 300 to 400 mentors. So just in this SoCal cluster of Techstars, we have a network of over 1,000 mentors that are helping our companies.
It's incredible.
And that's just LA. Like, we have clusters around the globe.
Right. How many companies have you worked with now, as far as with Techstars and your personal investments? How many?
It's like 130 to 150 or something like that. I have to do a count.
All right. 130 to 150 companies. What would you say the number one thing founders tend to get wrong when they start?
There's so many reasons why a company fails early. The single biggest reason is they build the wrong product, solving the wrong problem. They don't really spend enough time up front doing the customer discovery.
Right.
They build the technology first, and then they try and figure out who they can sell it to.
Right. I find that same issue even with later stage companies.
It's also true.
It's they maybe have kind of dug in and figured it out and got it, up to 5 million, 10 million, maybe something like that. But like, they didn't really do enough research to understand the depth of that market. And I actually think product and product management is probably one of the laggards of maturity in these organizations. And I think sometimes they operate in a vacuum a little bit.
Yeah. More often, the best founders I work with just come from the customer base that they're trying to address and lived the problem and are so frustrated by the problem that they are now spending the next leg of their career solving the problem. But that doesn't mean that they're good on the technology side.
Right.
They often have that as a gap.
Right.
So I need to see them have a good, strong technical co-founder who can help them realize their vision.
Right.
But, I'm over-indexing often on that complete, relentless obsession with the problem they're solving, more than have somebody who is trying to find the biggest commercial opportunity that they can go solve.
Right.
Which probably made me not the best founder myself, because I was always trying to find the biggest commercial opportunity and not necessarily coming at it from any particular passionate, deep underlying relentless commitment to solving it.
What was one of the things you looked for something and you thought that was kind of the main thing to look for early on in your investing, and maybe you've done a 180 on that?
Investing in necessarily the most charismatic people. Sometimes the most charismatic people are the best founders, and they can inspire people and convince people to part way with their cash and sign deals. But some of those charismatic people I've worked with were also some of the worst founders I've ever worked with too. So I don't, I haven't quite figured out what is the magic question to ask. But I do look, and I think a lot of VCs look for charisma. I need to know that someone's really articulate. I need to know that when somebody comes into my program that they're going to be able to hold their own in a boardroom and, convince future VCs to part with their capital. But the best founders by far are the ones who just get shit done. Like every 2 weeks they have an update and they're in a slightly better place than they were 2 weeks ago. And that relentless just focus and drive and execution is so much more important than the charisma, and I think they're often correlated. But I have some incredible founders in this most recent cohort where they're not the flashiest founders, they're just solid builders.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing for me, and that's why I wrote my book on it. And it's really about execution and operation. And I think you can figure that out. You can eventually find your win, even if you're lost.
Yeah.
And I think the most organized teams are the most successful teams. And I don't buy into that it's a startup and it's chaos. And I found over and over again the last 20 years, the most organized, focused teams are the ones that win, period.
Even if they don't know what they're doing yet, we try to force structure on, okay, how are you going to do the customer discovery and run a process to figure out what your business will be?
Right. You need to collect data, collect information, make decisions. I've mentored, I think, 9 years at Techstars now. And I've done, different workshops or presentations. And I remember sitting specifically with a group once, and I said, where are you guys going? What's your 3-year vision? They're like, we don't even know what we're doing tomorrow. I said, yeah, but let's just project this out. Let's just kind of get an idea what this is, get alignment on it. And one founder said, well, 3 years out, I'm going to be doing a fintech startup. And the other founder looked at him like, what are you talking about? What? You're leaving in 2 years? And I'm like, this is important why you do something like this, is that we need to pick a point in the future where we're going and make sure that we're all in alignment, we're going in that place. But I remember that happening. It was quite a while back at Techstars, this group, but that just really confirmed with me of how important it is to create alignment, even at the earliest of stages. So what would you say are the top 3 things you look for when investing in companies?
The first thing I'm looking for is, does this founder have a passionate, unrelenting commitment to solving the problem that they are set about to solving? So not are they enamored with the technology that they've built and trying to figure out a use for it, but really customer empathy. The second thing I'm looking for is, do they have the credibility to actually build the thing that they're building? Especially given that I am doing a lot of deep tech, I need to make sure that the technology, if it's not built already, which it usually is not, that the founders have the technical credibility to execute against it. And the third thing I'm looking for is some traction. Yeah. I need to know that they have been able to get something done. Right. And that can be a pilot, that can be an early customer, that can be a grant. I'm willing to go super early as well, and take a bet on a team where I think they'll figure it out. But usually companies coming into Techstars have something built and some initial traction. It's not just an idea.
Right.
And the last thing, I said 3, but the fourth thing is that I want to see some form of positive impact it's going to have on the planet. Mm-hmm. I'm not doing a lot of, this is maybe a response to my first half of my career, but I'm not doing a lot of entertainment. I spent the first half of my career doing consumer tech and entertainment. And if I look back on what positive contribution did I have on society, it's hard to point to anything other than maybe I made people happy for a couple hours. But that when you look at the sectors I'm investing in, it's a lot of impact. It's healthcare, it's aerospace and defense, it's climate tech and energy, It's things that affect national security as well as individual patients.
Yeah.
As well as global health. We have a bunch of companies that are doing Earth observation that help sit in both climate and aerospace.
Yeah.
We're doing semiconductors, things that are going to move the state of what you can build and the art of the possible, and also drive, I think, great returns for our investors.
I 100% agree with that. I think that's what gets me excited always about venture-backed companies. Is one, they're doing something that's never been done before, and they're innovating. And I love the ones that are innovating towards like driving humanity forward or driving the world, in a positive direction. And that's what gets me excited, and that's what I want to see.
I'll do a fun, just like, this is really neat, really exciting, really entertaining kind of investment every now and then.
Right.
Like we did a robot bartending company, and we did a black female-owned whiskey company in the last cohort. Do have to squint sometimes at those companies to say, is this making the planet a better, safer place, or
right.
just a slightly more fun one to be on?
Sometimes that's important too. Tell me about some companies that you're really excited about now, or some companies that maybe exited from your programs.
One of the things that I always have to clear up for people when they hear about Techstars Los Angeles is they think Techstars LA is mostly investing in LA-based companies. And while we do love investing in LA-based companies, most of our companies are coming outside of LA. And they come outside of LA because they want to get plugged into this really robust ecosystem where we've developed this mentor pool, these corporate and government relationships, these investor relationships, and grow much faster. And so we often see companies come from some pretty unusual places that probably nobody's thinking about in the LA venture community, who want to come here and set up shop. So one of my favorite case studies is a company called Rawazi. They came from Mauritius. When I first heard about them, I had to check the map to make sure I actually knew where Mauritius was. And someday I would love to go there because it seems absolutely gorgeous. But these founders bootstrapped their way to 30K of MRR in Mauritius. They had to take out these horrible loans with the worst payment terms on it you could possibly imagine. But they had no resources available to them. There is no venture capital community in Mauritius. But I saw the opportunity for what they're doing. So basically what they do is they had, even at that time, they had built a network of about 10,000 high school or college educated freelance consultants, people who they could ask a question to, and they'd go out and do it for a micropayment. Think like if you want to know the price of Dr. Pepper in 100 convenience stores across Kigali, if you're Procter & Gamble or PepsiCo, like that information is not available. So they have these 10,000 mappers, this is before Techstars, who could basically collect on-the-ground data for retail or telecoms, and they were doing 30K of monthly recurring revenue. And as a former management consultant, I was always trying to figure out, like, how do I get access to this data that surely must exist because it happens, like someone has to be able to measure it somehow. And so I brought them in. By the end of the program, this is literally 13 weeks later, they were doing over 150K monthly revenue.
Wow.
So they 5x'd their revenue in 13 weeks. That got some attention from local VCs. Bonfire wound up leading their round. Phenomenal enterprise SaaS firm. Now I think a year and a half later, less than a year later, they're doing close to 6 million in ARR. They've got over 100,000 mappers around the world. They're operating in LATAM, they're operating in Southeast Asia. I think it's just a great example of using the Techstars platform to grow really, really fast.
Right.
And now the founders live in LA. They still have their team in Mauritius as well. One of the teams that I think you worked with back in our space program is a company called Xenopower.
Absolutely worked with them.
This on paper makes no sense. It was one was a college dropout, the other had just graduated from Vanderbilt, and they were trying to build a nuclear power system for space and deep sea.
Right.
Using nuclear waste materials that we would otherwise spend hundreds of millions of dollars a year disposing of. They believe they could use those same waste materials and make a always-on electric power source for remote environments, which is a pretty big vision.
Mm-hmm.
It's even bigger when you think about, you know, a 20-year-old trying to get it off the ground. But yeah, those founders were so smart and so charismatic and so organized.
Yeah.
And yeah, they wound up doing our space program. They closed a $2 million grant while in program. They raised $3 million right out of program. They've now raised, I think, over $40 million since. They've received $40 million of government grants. They have offices across DC and the state of Washington, where they have most of their nuclear engineering team. You know, 5 years later, they're a real company doing real things, right. And it's, you know, amazing to see the progress they've made from.
One thing I remember specifically about them when I met with them is they really embraced the cadence I taught them. They really liked the idea of an annual session, a quarterly session, a weekly session, and they dove in real deep on the weekly meeting. And I remember when I first taught them how to do that, they were like, we feel like we're having adult grown-up meetings now. That's what they said. And we're getting things done. I just remember specifically how they embraced that cadence, and that goes back to what we were talking about earlier. I think the most organized teams win. And they definitely embrace that. But yeah, they've been fun to watch and track. Excited to see where they go too. I think it's just the beginning for what they're doing.
The beginning. I have a lot of optimism about the future with Zeno in it. Another one that I get really excited about is a company called Tasso. Tasso came to our healthcare program, and this is unusual because we usually don't take old companies, but they were an 8-year-old company that had already received $13 million of DARPA grant funding, a bunch of PhDs, and they came into our program around the same time that Theranos was just completely imploding. Raising their first round of capital was very challenging in the wake of Theranos, but they've now gone on to raise over $120 million. Their solution was part of Pfizer's COVID vaccine clinical trial process, so they were able to collect blood at scale from patients' homes and clinics around the world. They were used in the Olympics to do all the anti-dope testing.
I think I just saw the device on someone at the UFC.
The UFC uses them as well. That's right. The military uses them. They, the Navy can collect blood from an entire aircraft carrier's worth of soldiers, and on a regular cadence without needing labs. So I think it's a game-changing technology. And I'm really excited about all their progress since they went through the program. And it's a good reminder that just because they're not a 1-year-old or 2-year-old startup doesn't mean they're not a good fit for Techstars. Sometimes, especially with deep tech, they need to mature the product to a point where we can help them commercialize and capitalize.
Right.
And we have a really good relationship with DARPA. And I think DARPA looks at Tasso as a great example of one where it worked. The grant funding that they provided helped that company get to commercialization, but DARPA alone wasn't sufficient. They needed a little bit more support on the commercializing and fundraising support, which Techstars is really good at.
Yeah, there's a lot of great examples with the programs that you've done, and I'm having a feeling that there's going to be a lot more in the future as well.
I hope so. I think so.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it was fun.
I got another 24 companies for you to mentor in a couple weeks.
I'll be there.
Are we recording, by the way?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, cool.
It's just like we're hanging out, but we actually have like 10 cameras on us.
Yeah.
It's like you're walking into Amazon Fresh.
Yeah. Yeah. So you have nothing in this car worth taking. No, not even a single tchotchke.